I'm here today with Dr. Judy Wilyman. And how are you today?
Good, thanks, Perth.
Excellent. We're here, you're speaking at the HAP, the Health Australia Party talk this evening in Perth. What are you conveying?
Well, we're just talking about health issues and people's right to fully informed consent to medications, including vaccines, and we're talking about the 5G issues and yes, a lot of different health issues.
It's a good information session because people these days are a bit confused about those very topics. I think we are in an information age which also presents the dilemma of over-information, and people can be a bit confused because every man and his friend has an opinion on social media.
They do.
And unfortunately these days I'm not sure if the mainstream media is representing all the facts. They might be presenting one side of what's going on, but not all the sides.
No, they're definitely not representing accurate information, particularly on the vaccination issue and control of infectious diseases.
Now, you have a PhD and you've challenged some of the status quo since 2015 when you've done that research.
Yeah, in fact 5 years before that I started debating
as well
the research because I did a Master of Science first.
Wow, so since 2010. How has the media received this information? How have they conveyed your message?
Well, firstly, there's not a single journalist that has rung up to present the information that I found in my PhD and the conclusions that I made. There's been journalists that have written stories about my PhD and denigrated, ridiculed and provided false information about what's in my PhD and about myself.
Wow.
So there's been a lot of defamation.
It must be difficult.
Oh, it's very difficult because, of course, I'm the only one in my social group that's not allowed to have an opinion on this topic.
Yeah, like we said,
everybody else knows. They're reading the media.
Everybody else who's uneducated is having an opinion.
That's it.
Whereas you're an academic and you're a doctor, you've done a PhD on this topic, and you haven't had a break in the sense of being able to share your voice and your research of the facts.
That's correct, and it's not just the media, the official channels for debate. They also have selected out certain voices from the academic forums where this information should be presented. The abstracts don't get accepted, and therefore it gives the appearance that there's this consensus of the science simply because it's the scientific network with the most money that can control the dialogue and influence the media and influence politicians, in fact.
It's very interesting, and we'll come back to this point because certain things have come to light with COVID-19 that make people question everything. And if you're not questioning everything, I urge you to discern for yourself what is in fact true and what's facts and what's somebody else's made up version of the events. So to tell us in your own words, what would be like a concise message of your thesis? I know that you've probably covered a lot in that research and in the work that you did, where you're challenging the government on those vaccination policies. Just if you could
the
share
concise point is literally that vaccines were not used to control these diseases.
Right.
And that's why most adults haven't had the 16 vaccines that are now listed on the children's schedule, which children are now required to have even to get an early childhood education and to participate in certain areas of society. The 0 to 5-year-olds now are restricted in that, and parents lose welfare benefits when the parents have never had these vaccines because they didn't control the diseases. The diseases were controlled through your public health measures, sanitation, hygiene, and particularly nutrition, which built up the constitution. And the other fallacy is that viruses, that everybody's exposed to a virus actually gets a disease, a serious disease. That's completely wrong. Viruses are not living organisms, and if you've got a healthy immune system and a good environment, then they don't cause disease in the individual. You might get an asymptomatic infection, and that gives long-term immunity.
Right.
So the whole discourse on how viruses actually cause disease has been misrepresented by the media because, the medical industry actually, because...
And then the media on top of it conveying that message.
It, that's it. And so there's been a long history of indoctrination with that idea, and, viruses will have cause a different degree of disease in different people because they don't cause disease on their own.
Right.
It's environmental factors and host factors
Right.
combined with the agent
Depends
that result. It depends on the person.
If they're healthy or they're not.
Exactly.
If they've already got preconditions of some kind of
That's
other
right.
disease.
Then they're more likely to get a serious case of a disease if they're exposed to that virus.
Makes sense.
And so, yes, once your public health measures were approved,
Yes.
and the nutrition, that is, all of the infectious diseases declined at the same time in developed countries by 1950. And none of these diseases were used in with mass vaccination programs until after 1953.
Right.
Yeah.
So both enlightening and insightful.
Yeah.
I'm wondering why that hasn't made it to the rest of the Australian population, the information and the thesis that you've done in your research, which is definitely valuable and required, even more so today.
It is, yeah.
So I'm wondering how on earth did this insanity sort of happen, where the government's allowed things like policies like no jab, no pay, no play, and all that sort of business?
Yes, it is insanity. It's turned everything upside down. All the ethics of medicine actually have been turned upside down. But it's happened because in the 80s, the pharmaceutical companies were allowed to, the liability for any harm that vaccines caused was removed from the pharmaceutical companies. And the public was not made aware of that.
Right.
And so through the 90s, they then started to add more vaccines to the schedule, and all the compensation claims that were known about before the 90s were now, the US set up a vaccine compensation injury program.
Right. Yes.
And the government then
has to pay the damages.
So basically the people pay themselves through taxes.
Right.
This vaccine injury compensation program in the US. And millions of dollars are paid every year.
Yeah.
Mind you, it's only the tip of the iceberg, because many of the injuries that are reported are not acknowledged as being linked to the vaccines.
Yeah.
So because of the time delay that often happens
Yeah.
with some of these injuries. So even the millions of dollars that we're seeing in compensation is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And in Australia, we don't have that vaccine injury compensation program.
Right.
And in fact, the media and the government both say that risks to vaccines are rare, and that's simply not true.
Yeah.
All the chronic illnesses are linked with the vaccines.
Sure. Things like autoimmune diseases and all the other
Absolutely.
things that are coming up.
Yeah.
So, Judy, if I may just reinstate what you've said in my own layman words, the government that we've elected as the people of Australia, or the majority have elected, has forced upon us some sort of crazy scheme for a schedule of vaccines that isn't required.
That's correct. Yeah.
And in return, if people get unwell and they claim for damages, the people will have to reimburse or repay or pay for those damages at the taxpayers. But that's not even effective in Australia.
No, that's right.
Only
that's
in the US.
US and 20 other countries.
Recently.
There's 20 other countries that have vaccine injury compensation programs,
Right.
but not Australia. And I don't approve of a vaccine injury compensation program, because that's accepting the collateral damage. They call it collateral damage. I mean, and because the government has never monitored the frequency of these reactions in the population, we don't even know the full damage. But if you look at children's health, 50% of children 0 to 14 now have a chronic illness. Many of them are permanent, lifelong, debilitating illnesses, and parents are long-term carers for these children. And I think this is, it's time this debate has to happen, because
It has to happen. And
the genetic fabric of society is being destroyed
yeah.
with these vaccines.
And I think more importantly, beyond the debate and people getting informed, changes need to take place in the government to change this, to reverse some of these things that they've put in. Maybe they did it unknowingly, maybe they did it without the right kind of advice or misinformation.
I think there's a bigger picture there, but I would like to just say before we finish up that bodily autonomy, without your right to bodily autonomy, there is no freedom.
Sure.
When you give your body to the government and they can decide how many vaccines they put into your children and yourselves, that's your quality of life that you're giving away. And there is no freedom for our children if we allow coercive vaccination or mandatory vaccination to continue.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, where is the freedom? Where is the democracy? Where is the liberty if we're signing off our body to the government and then hoping that we don't get damaged?
Yeah, that's right.
thank you so much for your time and for the information that you're presenting to the community and sharing with the people.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.